What I just done read.
Hello, and welcome back to What I Just Done Read. My name is Max, this is my Bohemian Book Corner, and this is a book review show that likes to give a fair airing to books of all ages, not just those that are currently on the bestsellers or the new releases list. And that is very much the case with today's book, as we are talking about The Duel by Joseph Conrad. Before we do that, of course, there is just the business of our word of the day. And the word today is, where is it? Hebitude. It's one that I found in The Duel, and it is a word that was apparently first coined in 1621, and it is a state or of being dull or lazy. Probably a better one, actually, rather than lazy, would be lethargic. So if you wanted to use it in your own writing, you could say that it could be the pungent aroma of the herbitude could probably account for Terry's state of hebitude, if you wanted to get clever with it. So yeah, lovely little word there. If you need to use it, if you're sick and tired of using the more commonly used words for these kind of things, take it, make it your own, and give it some love. Before we go any further, it's something I don't really tend to do on this show very much, and I probably should. First off, thank you to everybody who follows the show and checks out what I've been reading and things like that. It's very much appreciated. And of course, if you can, please like, share, and subscribe this video. Subscribe to the channel and share this video, as well as leaving a comment about what you think and about what you thought possibly of the books that I cover in the show. And of course, if you do want to support us further, then we do have our Patreon, also our Buy Me a Coffee, which you'll find links to in the description below. So we will continue, as we generally do, with our bullet point biography. Joseph Conrad, born Joseph Theodor Conrad Kozewiowski, I got that right, on the 3rd of December 1857. He was born in Berechiv in the Ukraine, part of the Kiev Governorate of the Russian Empire. He was an essayist, a novelist, and a short story writer, and he wrote in a range of literary styles and movements, including modernism, neo-romanticism, and also literary impressionism, Despite being born in the Ukraine, his family were actually Polish and were part of what's generally referred to as the intelligentsia of Polish society, otherwise known as, if I'm saying this right, the Zalacha. His father, Apollo Kozewiowski, was a political activist who was vying for political freedom and the liberation of Poland, which at the time, control of the country was divided between the Russian Empire, Austria and Prussia. His father was himself a poet, as well as a translator and a playwright, and it was because of his political leanings that the family were moved around different areas of the Russian Empire, almost in exile. And it's partly because of this, because of some of the places where the family were forced to move to, that Conrad found himself orphaned at the age of 11, after both his mother and his father succumbed to tuberculosis, about 2 years apart from each other. As a result of which, care for the young Conrad fell to the responsibility of his maternal uncle, whose name was Tadeusz Bobrowski. Generally speaking, as a boy, not surprisingly because of the nature of his upbringing, Conrad was of a nervous and quite sickly disposition. Despite this, even when he was quite young, he stated his intent to become a sailor. Between the years of 1874 and 1893, he got his wish and he worked as a merchant seaman under a number of different flags, not just the Russian flag, but also the French and the British maritime flags as well. Early in his career, around 1878, he was technically grounded. I'm not sure if that's the right term for a navalman. I know that's the term for a pilot, but I'm not sure of the naval equivalent, because money wasn't forthcoming from the Russian government to pay for his ticket to sail. At this time, he'd run up a number of debts from living large, shall we say, and he attempted suicide. He shot himself in the chest. Obviously, he survived, and it was this event that spurned a fresh stream of cash from his uncle to tide him over until he could get back to sea. He did a range of jobs whilst he was a merchant seaman, including in gaining his captaincy, although he did only sail one voyage as captain from Adelaide in Australia to the island of Mauritius. Shortly after that, he retired from his naval career and eventually settled in England, which would be his home pretty much for the rest of his life. While he was in the UK, he met and married Jessie George, who was an Englishwoman about 16 years his junior and was of a lower social class than himself. One of his friends, the socialite Lady Ottoline Murrell, said of his wife, and I quote, his wife Jessie seemed a nice and good-looking fat creature. An excellent cook, a good and reposeful mattress for this hypersensitive, nerve-wracked man, who did not ask from his wife high intelligence, only as an assuagement of life's vibrations. There's a compliment in there somewhere, I think. As I say, yeah, he did spend the rest of his life living in the UK, in Bishopsbourne, I believe. Yeah, Bishopsbourne in Kent, although he did have a protracted stay in Poland around the start of World War I, where he was unable to leave. So during his life he wrote 20 novels, the last of which, Suspense, was published posthumously and unfinished. So clearly somebody in the publishing industry wanted to make that ready. He also wrote at least 26 short stories, as well as 11 essays on various topics. His work has been adapted so many times, no less than 27 times on screen, probably the most famous of which being Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation of Heart of Darkness, otherwise known as Apocalypse Now.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Apparently there's also an opera of Apocalypse Now, of Heart of Darkness. It was also apparently the inspiration for 2K Games' title Spec Ops: The Line, which was released in 2012. This story itself was also adapted into this. Duelists, produced in 1977 and directed by Ridley Scott. I've got a feeling that you might actually catch this soon on another show that I'm involved in. I can't guarantee it, but it might just happen. Joseph Conrad died at the age of 66 on the 3rd of August 1924, presumably of a heart attack, and is currently interred in Canterbury Cemetery. So, to the book itself. Let's say the book, it's technically a short story, or a novella, if you like. This book itself isn't particularly long. This edition, which is by Lightning Source UK, doesn't come with any blurb, so I can't give you that. So instead, I'll just give you a brief synopsis of the story. The story centres around two hussars who were cavalry officers in Napoleon's army during the Napoleonic Wars, a Lieutenant de Hubert and a Lieutenant Feraud, who encounter each other and kind of rub each other up the wrong way. I won't tell you the exact reason why, because it's a key point to the story. But as a result, develop a feud, and during the course of the Napoleonic Wars, fight a series of duels that comes to the attention of their fellows and of the army in general. That these two men have this long-running feud, and what the reasons for this feud are. It remains a mystery to the majority of the observers of this. So the story itself first appeared in Conrad's collection, A Set of Six, which appeared in 1908. It's clearly a period that he was very interested in. Apparently one of his relations fought in the Napoleonic Wars. And the basic premise for the story, it has its roots in fact. Apparently there was two hussars who had a long-running feud during the Napoleonic Wars, whose names were Pierre Dupont de l'Etang and François-Louis Fournier Sarlevez. While obviously Conrad goes his own way with this and comes up with his own reasons for it, there is a close similarity between the factual events and the fictitious ones. Conrad employs a I'm going to say it is a masterful brevity of words in delivering this story, which, while on the one hand it does maintain the pace of the piece in general, considering that the story, and again, looking at how long this is, that spans almost 16 years. But on the other hand, it does, in places, detract from the epicness of the story. I mean, when I first started reading it, and I think this is more to do with just me needing to get used to Conrad's style, I thought over the first couple of pages, is this kind of written for like the kind of thing you might find in a magazine for boys? It felt that scaled back. But, as I say, I think that was just me getting used to Conrad's style, and there's so much more going on between the lines than what is just printed on the page. The narrative itself predominantly concerns itself with how these events affect the officer de Hubert. He's clearly the protagonist, and while there are moments and passages where we see and hear things from his rival Farrell's point of view, you're not left in any doubt that de Hubert is the character that you should be rooting for, if you like. The way the story is told, it does give a certain remoteness and abstraction to the work, which in places I found reminiscent of something like, almost like a fable or possibly a parable? I don't know. Which, when you consider that the themes and the subtext of the story are using this feud as a foil for the quite sweeping social changes and upheaval of the early 19th century, predominantly as a result of the machinations, if you like, of Napoleon Bonaparte. Very much steeped in the effect that egoism and that egotism can have on a world stage. I do accept, though, that some of this is merely my interpretation of it, and especially the points that I was saying there about the kind of the remoteness of the way the story is presented. As I said, that may simply be my interpretation of that very Polish kind of turn of expression that Conrad was known for and is actually credited for having introduced into English literature. What we get here is a story that is more, it feels more that it is told to you than shown for about the first 2/3 of it. It's a bit different towards the end, but certainly the rest of it feels like that. And again, that kind of puts me in mind again of what I was saying a moment ago about this feeling like almost like a fable. So much of it is told almost as if it's being told to you by a narrator, with occasionally the story dropping into scene, if you like, which are the only parts where we get any direct dialogue between characters. And the scarcity of those does kind of elevate their importance within the narrative, and it does really set them apart from the more broad strokes of the rest of the work. The ending of the story is pretty good. It's pretty cool. I kind of was a little bit spoiled by this because I've already seen the film before. That's kind of how I know the story. So that didn't offer any surprises to me. But it's well handled, and there are some subtle differences there to the movie. As to this particular product itself, as I said, it was produced by a company called, was it Lightning Source UK? I had to look them up. They're actually a print-on-demand service, so I don't actually know who commissioned this particular edition. I'm assuming it was by a lover of Conrad, because his works would now be out of copyright. It's not a bad edition. It's serviceable. I did find that, as you can see, the actual typeface itself is a little bit small, a little bit narrow, which, as I do a lot of my reading, like when I'm on the move and stuff like that, doesn't make things easier. I also thought it was quite interesting that they've saved money by not actually putting any page numbers on there anywhere, which, as somebody who doesn't use a bookmark, I just remember what page I'm on, was a little bit infuriating. But otherwise, it's perfectly serviceable. You can read it and it's okay. That's about all I can really say about the product itself. Although the cover's quite nice. It was a bit confusing when I saw it when I bought it online. I was like, oh wow, is it a hardback? And then it's like, no, it's not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and very quickly do my eyes. I think I'll do that now, and then I'll come back and do as I tend to do, and just give you a few kind of like final thoughts and my overall impressions and my recommendation for the book itself. So while I'm gone, I recommend that you check that your seconds are well appointed, and I will see you on the field of battle. Okay, we'll come to that in a moment. Have some more tea. 10 paces, turn and fire. No, don't. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, my introduction to this story was the movie adaptation, The Duelists, which was recommended to me many, many years ago by my old friend Rob Berry. Thank you very much. So, adding the book to my list and finally getting a chance to sit down and read it, I was kind of quite excited for that. I must admit, I was a little disappointed to discover how short the story actually is. And that, I think, is part of the problem. And again, so it's not a problem of the story itself, it's a problem of my expectation. I mean, essentially, again, as the story was told to me originally when I first heard about it, was 2 French cavalry officers fight a series of duels against the backdrop of the Napoleonic Wars. And when you actually get to see the story itself, for me it suffered from, how can I put it? The concept outshines the execution, was my first thought sort of coming into this. You know, because I kind of expected the book to be almost like a swashbuckling epic. I'm not saying like on the scale of, say, War and Peace or North and South, but something not far off that, with, you know, dripping with Napoleonic sentiment and all of those kind of wonderful things. And that's clearly not what we get. And again, I hold my hand up, as I say, that was my impression and my expectation. I can't say that that's Conrad's fault. He knew the story that he wanted to write, and he has written it and he delivers it with rapier-sharp attention to detail. So while I will say that I was underwhelmed by the story when I first saw it, there is a charm to it, and it does grow on you, and it very quickly endear itself to you. It does demand a little bit more from you as a reader. You have to kind of, as I said earlier, read between the lines a lot of the time with this. And when I got to the end of it, I did find myself saying, considering what I'd considered when I first started the book to when I got to the end of it, is there any other way that you could have told this story? Would it have outstayed its welcome if you'd have tried to factor in all of these other elements that I expected to find before I started reading it? And I suppose, no, you couldn't have told it any other way. Especially, again, considering what it is, the message that Conrad is trying to deliver. So with all that said, would I recommend the book? Yeah, I think I would. Obviously, if you're a fan of Conrad's, you've either probably already read it, or it's probably on your list, so I don't need to recommend it to you. If you're not, it's a good introduction to Conrad and his work. And I would definitely say, give it a look. Just don't build it up in your mind beforehand like I did. As I said, that's a very personal thing. You know, it's my own preconceptions that led to my disappointment, nothing to do with the work itself. So, in terms of my eyes for this one, so for the Duel, because the edition is what it is, it's okay. So it gets a 2-eye for the product itself. But for the story, it gets a reasonable 3-eye. It's, as I said, again, I've tried to not allow my own personal disappointment to factor into that. I think it's an okay story. I still think that there are elements about, you know, as I said, the premise sounds a lot grander than the story is itself, but as it does have its own charm. So it's a good story, and yeah, I'd say give it a look. So we can take the Duel off the list, which is, where are we? Is over here. So if you can see that. There it goes. That one has lost this Duel. Terrible, I know. And what we're going to do, as I have been trying to do, is a kind of flip and flopping between stuff that's on the older part of the list and stuff that's on the newer part of the list. So I'm going to go to this side here. And this one is, after having just completed a collection of books from my good buddy Simon Morgan, he sent me some more. So this one is one that I have no idea about, and this one is called The Devil in Disguise by Ginny Hole. But yes, so this apparently is a collection of 10 short tales about the devil, just in time for spooky season. There were a couple of just very short passages in this that tweaked my interest. One of them because I don't understand why it's here. It's an oddity because it doesn't really seem to have any bearing on the story as a whole. So I don't know why Conrad's included it. So it's towards the beginning of the story, and our protagonist, Hubert, is looking for his rival-to-be, comes to the house where Conrad has been billeted. He's not there, and he has a short discussion with the serving girl who is there. And on taking his leave, it says, after manifesting his gratitude in an aggressive way, which at first was repulsed violently, and then submitted to with a sudden and still more repellent indifference, Lieutenant de Hubert took his departure. What now? So when you read those 3 lines, that seems to suggest that he's somehow forced himself on her? Which doesn't make any sense because the way the character is portrayed before that and then later on through the rest of the story, de Hubert is a paragon of good conduct. He's presented as being at times quite affable, but generally speaking, a man of honour. So what that is about and why it's there, I don't know. I don't understand. And as I say, it doesn't. That passage there really has no bearing on the rest of the story. So I'm curious. I'm curious about that. If anybody knows, please do let me know in the comments below. And the other one was just a nice little thing towards the end of the story in chapter 4 that I found quite interesting and quite nice. And it's something I think that we can all, at times, do kind of reminding ourselves of, which is that no man succeeds in everything he undertakes. In that sense, we are all failures. The great point is to not fail in ordering and sustaining the effort of our life. In this matter, vanity is what leads us astray. It hurries us into situations from which we must come out damaged, whereas pride is our safeguard, by the reserve it imposes on the choice of our endeavour as much as by the virtue of its sustaining power. Wonderful. Thank you, Conrad. I'm going to find me a quiet corner somewhere and spend some quality time with the enemy. And until the next one, get thee gone.
Ziggy piggy, ziggy piggy, ziggy piggy.
Unfinished. So, somebody. We're just inventing words of our own. If somebody wants to tell me what somebody means, then please do.
Well done, somebody.
I'm going to create a World War I officer called Somebody now.